My son didn't just fake his wife's death to move a secret fiancé into a mansion. He was actively poisoning her every night to trigger a $4 million life insurance payout. I waited in his apartment and watched him prepare the toxic tea. To understand how I sent my child to prison, I must take you back to Skokie. Top of Chapter 1. I sent my only child to federal prison. I packed his expensive suits into cheap cardboard boxes. I sat in a cold courtroom and watched the judge lock him away. People call me a monster, but numbers don't lie, but my blood does. It started on a Tuesday in late October. I was driving down I-94 from Milwaukee back to Chicago. I decided to make a detour to Skokie. I wanted to surprise my son, Langston, and his wife, Paloma. Langston is a highly successful architect. He makes mid-six figures. 8 months ago, he called me on FaceTime. He was sitting in his pristine downtown office. The Chicago skyline was visible behind him. He was rubbing his eyes. He looked utterly exhausted. He told me Paloma's pregnancy was high risk. Strict bed rest, he said. He claimed he was hiring private nurses to watch her. I believed him. Istinum, I actually believed him. I pulled off the highway at the Dempster Street exit. My lower back was aching from the long drive. I needed coffee before facing my daughter-in-law. I pulled into the parking lot of a Skokie Waffle House. The yellow sign was buzzing in the gray afternoon light. I walked inside. The bell above the door jingled sharply. The air in there smelled heavy. It was a thick mix of stale grease and industrial bleach. A waitress poured a fresh pot of coffee behind the counter. The steam rose into the cold air. I sat down at a sticky laminate table near the window. There was a crumpled receipt left behind by the previous customer. I smoothed it out with my thumb. The black ink was slightly faded. It read, Server, Paloma F. Time, 2014 p.m. It was time-stamped just 10 minutes ago. I traced the letters with my fingernail. I stared at that slip of paper. Paloma F. It couldn't be. It was a common name. I told myself I was overthinking. I wasn't. I looked up toward the back of the diner. A woman was wiping down booth 4. She was wearing a stained yellow apron. Her belly was massive. She was easily 8 months pregnant. She turned around to grab a bottle of cleaner. My breath caught in my throat. My hands went completely cold. The thick ceramic coffee mug slipped right through my fingers. It shattered on the black and white checkered floor. The sound echoed through the quiet diner. The pregnant waitress flinched and looked over. Our eyes met. It was Paloma, my daughter-in-law. The woman supposedly confined to a luxury mattress under medical care. She froze. The rag dropped from her trembling hands. Her face drained of all color. She looked absolutely terrified. She mouthed the word, Margot. I could read her lips perfectly from across the room. The diner suddenly felt entirely devoid of oxygen. The blood was roaring in my ears. I stood up. My knees were shaking so badly I had to grip the table. Why was she here? Why was the wife of an architect working in a diner? Have you ever had a moment where your reality just snaps in half? I looked at her swollen ankles. I looked at the dark circles under her eyes. The math wasn't adding up. The ledger of my son's life was built on a massive fraud. I reached for the silverware rolled in a paper napkin. My fingers felt like ice. I dropped my fork, staring at the pregnant waitress scrubbing booth 4 because she was supposed to be on strict bed rest and she was married to my millionaire son. Topic, Chapter 2. The ceramic mug hit the linoleum floor and exploded. Hot coffee splattered across my leather boots. The sharp crack echoed through the entire diner. The clatter of silverware stopped. Every head turned in our direction, but I was only looking at her. Paloma, my pregnant daughter-in-law. She was frozen behind the diner counter. Her eyes were wide with absolute terror. She looked like a deer caught in headlights. I stepped right over the shattered ceramic. I grabbed her arm. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely grip her. I didn't care who was watching us. I pulled her toward the back of the restaurant. We slid into a secluded corner booth. The red vinyl seat stuck to my wool coat. The whole place smelled like burnt sugar and cheap maple syrup. Paloma was trembling so hard the table actually vibrated. She was 8 months pregnant. Her yellow apron was stained with old grease. Her name tag hung crookedly on her chest. I looked down at her swollen ankles. She was wearing cheap black sneakers. My blood turned to absolute ice. I leaned across the sticky formica table. I kept my voice dangerously low. I asked her what the hell she was doing here. She couldn't even look me in the eye. She just stared at the plastic syrup dispenser. She whispered that they needed the money. I felt a muscle twitch in my jaw. Need the money? My son was a senior architect in downtown Chicago. He made mid-six figures. I opened my leather purse. I pulled out my iPhone. I unlocked the screen with a trembling thumb. I pulled up my text messages with Langston. I shoved the phone across the table. I told her to read it. The screen was glaring under the harsh fluorescent lights. The text was from last Tuesday at 4:12 p.m. It said, "Thanks, Mom. The specialist is expensive, but Paloma needs it." Paloma stared at the glowing screen. All the color drained from her face. She looked like she was going to be sick. She looked up at me. Her voice cracked. She said she hadn't seen a doctor in 3 months. I felt my stomach drop to the floor. I asked her what she meant. I told her I was sending Langston $5,000 on the first of every month, specifically for her medical care, specifically for the baby's nursery. A tear spilled down her cheek. It landed on the collar of her cheap uniform. She shook her head. She said Langston told her his firm cut his salary. She said they were drowning in credit card debt. She said they couldn't afford real doctors. That's why he was treating her pregnancy cramps himself. I asked her how. She wiped her nose with a rough paper napkin. She said Langston brewed her a special herbal tea every single night. He insisted she drink every last drop. He told her it was an ancient remedy. Istinum. My brain went completely silent. Then the retired auditor in me woke up. Numbers don't lie, but my blood does. $60,000 a year. That's what I was wiring directly into his Chase checking account. Vanished. Gone. Just like that. I looked at this terrified girl. She was carrying my grandson. She was working on her feet for minimum wage. Meanwhile, my son was cashing my checks. Where was the money actually going? You know that feeling when your gut is screaming at you? The feeling that you're only seeing the tip of a very dark iceberg? I sat in that sticky Waffle House booth. I felt a cold sweat break out on the back of my neck. My son wasn't just lying about his finances. He was hiding something massive, something dangerous. I thought I was funding my grandson's nursery. I had no idea I was funding a graveyard. I didn't even let her bend down to pick up the shattered mug. I grabbed her wrist. Her skin was freezing cold despite the sweat on her forehead. I pulled her straight into the diner's restroom. I locked the heavy wooden door behind us. The deadbolt slid into place with a loud click. The small room smelled like cheap bleach and stale fry grease. The fluorescent lights buzzed like angry hornets above us. Paloma backed up against the dirty porcelain sink. She was trembling so hard her yellow apron shook. Her breathing was shallow and fast. I needed to get her to a hospital immediately. But first, I needed the ledger of her reality. You cannot fix a deficit until you audit the entire ledger. I asked her when she last saw an obstetrician. She covered her face with her hands. She sobbed out the truth. 3 months ago. I asked her why Langston wasn't using his firm's premium insurance. She dropped her hands. She looked at me like I was insane. Langston doesn't have insurance, Margot, she whispered. He quit his architecture job 6 months ago. My stomach hit the floor. The cold tile seemed to tilt under my boots. I grabbed the edge of the sink to steady myself. He quit. 6 months ago, he had been cashing my checks while pretending to go to an office. She wiped her nose with a rough paper towel. She told me he left to start a new business. She didn't know what the business even was, just that it required all his time and all their money. She reached deep into the pocket of her stained apron. Her fingers were raw and red from washing dishes. She pulled out a crumpled piece of pink paper. She shoved it into my hands. It was a final eviction warning notice. I smoothed out the creases. I scanned the numbers 4 months past due on rent, totaling exactly $9,200. Numbers don't lie, but my blood does. I asked her how she was surviving. She said she was working 60-hour weeks here at the Waffle House. Just to keep the lights on, I felt a cold, righteous fury building in my chest. I asked her about the money I had been sending. The $5,000 a month. For the private nurses. For the strict bed rest. Paloma stopped crying. The silence in that bathroom was deafening. The dripping faucet sounded like a ticking clock. She didn't know about the money. Not a single cent. Instead, Langston had told her a completely different story. He told her I violently disapproved of the pregnancy, that I had completely cut them off financially. My own son had weaponized my name to abuse his pregnant wife. My mind snapped back to a family dinner 3 years ago. We were sitting in my dining room in Chicago. I remember giving Paloma a polite but chilly smile over the roast. I had always kept her at arm's length. I thought she was just another girl after his trust fund. Langston knew that. He used my own distant behavior as the perfect cover story. Eastonham. He built a cage out of my own coldness. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell her about every single wire transfer. I wanted to show her my Chase checking account app, but I am a retired forensic accountant. You never tip off the fraudster before you secure the assets. If I told Paloma everything now, she might confront him. She might spook him. I needed to find out what this mysterious new business actually was. Where was my $60,000 going, and what was in that mandatory herbal tea? So I swallowed the truth. It tasted like ash in my mouth. I folded the eviction notice. I put it inside my leather purse. I looked at her swollen belly. I told her to take off the apron. We were leaving. I told her I was taking her to Northwestern Memorial Hospital. Right now, we were going to see a real doctor. She didn't move. She just leaned against the dirty sink. She looked me dead in the eye, tears cutting through her cheek foundation, and asked why I hated her so much that I told Langston to let her starve. I stared at the dirty tiles of that Waffle House bathroom. I had to choose my next words very carefully. The smell of cheap bleach was making me nauseous. Paloma was shaking. She looked so small in that stained yellow apron. I looked at her tear-streaked face. I said, Paloma, I don't hate you. I took a slow, deep breath. And I never told Langston to cut you off. She blinked. Her hands gripped the edge of the dirty porcelain sink. Her knuckles were completely white. I said, get your coat. You are not going back to that apartment. She didn't argue. She just nodded. I drove us straight down the I-94 to Northwestern Memorial Hospital. The traffic was brutal. The heater in my Lexus was blasting. Paloma sat in the passenger seat in dead silence. We walked through the sliding glass doors of the emergency room. The waiting area was freezing. Fluorescent lights buzzed loudly overhead. I paid for the triage visit in cash. I wasn't letting Langston's insurance get flagged. I needed him totally blind to my movements. We sat in a sterile white examination room for 2 hours. The doctor finally came in. He checked her vitals. He checked the baby. He said the baby's heartbeat was strong, but Paloma was severely malnourished. She was dangerously dehydrated. He asked about her diet. She mentioned the mandatory daily herbal tea. The doctor frowned. He told her to stop drinking it immediately. He said untested herbs can trigger premature labor. My blood turned to ice. I squeezed my leather purse until my fingers ached. Langston was feeding her poison. By 9 o'clock that night, we were at the Marriott on Michigan Avenue. I booked a 2-bedroom corner suite. The room smelled like fresh linen and expensive soap. The carpets were thick and quiet. Paloma was exhausted. She fell asleep almost instantly in the master bedroom. I stood in the doorway and watched her breathe. I closed her door with a soft click. The suite was completely silent. I walked into the living area. The city lights of Chicago glowed through the floor-to-ceiling windows. I sat down at the heavy glass desk. I pulled my laptop from my tote bag. I opened the lid. The screen illuminated the dark room. I reached into my purse. I took out my wire-rimmed reading glasses. I slipped them on. I felt a physical shift in my chest. The grieving mother was gone. The forensic accountant had arrived. Langston was incredibly arrogant. He always thought he was the smartest guy in the room. He made a fatal mistake. He never removed me as a co-signer on his oldest legacy checking account. It was the Chase account I opened for him during his freshman year of college. I went to the bank's website. I typed in my old login credentials. I pressed enter. The dashboard loaded. Numbers don't lie, but my blood does. I clicked on the transaction history. I filtered the data for the last 6 months. I was looking for my money. There they were, my monthly transfers. $5,000 arriving on the first of every single month. I traced the outgoing money trail. I opened the digital bank statement showing the outgoing wire transfers. The money didn't go to a high-risk OBGYN. It didn't go to the landlord. It didn't go to groceries. I found 5 consecutive transfers of $5,000. The destination was listed in stark black text. The beneficiary was Rayland Holdings, LLC. I stared at the glowing screen. My heart hammered against my ribs. The air in the hotel room suddenly felt very thin. Breland Holdings LLC. I had never heard of this company in my life. It wasn't his architecture firm. It wasn't a medical provider. It was a newly formed LLC, a classic shell company. I pulled up the digital calculator on my screen. I tallied the missing funds. I looked back at the bedroom door. If Langston wasn't paying rent and he wasn't paying for food, where the hell was my $20,000? Topic Chapter 5. I stared at the blinking cursor on my laptop screen. $20,000 doesn't just evaporate into thin air. It leaves a paper trail. I spent 30 years tracking missing money for the IRS. I was going to follow this trail straight to the end. The hotel room air conditioning was running high. I pulled my wool coat tighter around my shoulders. I opened a new tab on my browser. I typed in the Illinois Secretary of State business search. My fingers were actually shaking. I took a deep breath to steady my hands. I typed the exact name from the bank statements. Breland Holdings LLC. I had entered the public records database loaded instantly. I adjusted my wire-rimmed reading glasses. I leaned closer to the glowing screen. There it was. An active limited liability company. Filing date 7 months ago. That was right around the time Langston claimed his salary was cut. Registered agent Langston Vreeland. My own son. Eastonham. My stomach twisted into a hard knot. I felt a sharp metallic taste in my mouth. He was lying about everything. I clicked on the full company profile. I expected to see a downtown commercial address, maybe a rented desk in a sleek co-working space. Instead, I saw a residential street name, 402 Elmwood Drive, Naperville, Illinois. That is a quiet, expensive suburb 30 miles away. Why did my son have a business registered at a house? Architects don't run shell companies out of suburban living rooms. They just don't. I toggled back to the Chase checking account dashboard. I scrolled through the PDF transaction history again. I needed more data. My eyes caught a recurring line item, $450. It was auto-drafted on the first of every single month. The merchant name was listed as Apex Assurance. I wrote it down on the Marriott Hotel notepad. I figured it was just an expensive car insurance policy. I was wrong, but that didn't matter right now. I checked the digital clock on the bedside table. It was 11:14 p.m. Langston would be expecting Paloma home from her diner shift. Her shift ended at 10. If he hadn't noticed her absence already, he was about to. My phone was sitting face down on the desk. It hadn't rung yet. The silence in that hotel room was deafening. The clock was ticking. We couldn't stay here. I walked over to the king-size bed. Paloma was buried under the heavy white duvet. Her breathing was shallow and uneven. She looked exhausted. I gently touched her shoulder. She woke up with a sharp, terrified gasp. Her eyes darted around the luxury hotel suite in pure panic. She looked completely disoriented. It took her a full 10 seconds to remember where she was. She realized she wasn't in that horrible apartment. I kept my voice perfectly level. I said, "Paloma, get dressed." She sat up slowly. She clutched the white sheets to her chest. She asked, "Where are we going?" I grabbed my leather tote bag from the chair. I slipped my laptop inside. I said, "We are going for a drive." 10 minutes later, we were in my Lexus. The leather seats were freezing cold against my legs. I merged onto I-94 West. The highway was mostly empty at this hour. The dashboard clock glowed a harsh neon blue. 11:32 p.m. Paloma stared out the passenger window in total silence. The streetlights flashed across her pale face. She looked so incredibly fragile. I gripped the steering wheel tight. My mind was processing the financial data. $5,000 a month being siphoned away. A residential address in the wealthy suburbs. A newly formed corporate entity hiding in plain sight. Numbers don't lie, but my blood does. I took the exit for Naperville. The tires hummed against the cold asphalt. I finally understood what I was looking at. The LLC wasn't a tech startup. It was a real estate holding company, and it had just purchased a property 30 miles away. My phone lit up in the center console at 8:14 a.m. The caller ID said Langston. We were already on I-88 West. Paloma was asleep in the passenger seat of my Lexus. The faint, sterile smell of the hospital emergency room still clung to her clothes. Her plastic admission bracelet was still wrapped tightly around her thin wrist. I silenced the call. Hugh was finally waking up to an empty apartment. His pregnant wife hadn't come home from her grueling diner shift. The panic was finally setting in. Good. Let him sweat. I glanced at my dashboard mount. Google Maps showed a glowing blue line. Destination 402 Elmwood Drive, ETA 45 minutes. My phone buzzed again. A text message this time. The screen flashed. Mom, have you heard from Paloma? I'm worried. Istanum, the absolute audacity of this boy. He was feeding her poison and playing the concerned husband. Numbers don't lie, but my blood does. Then Paloma's cracked iPhone vibrated in the cup holder. He was calling her now. I watched her shattered screen light up with his smiling picture. He looked so handsome in that photo. So trustworthy. I reached over and powered her phone completely off. The screen went black. The scenery outside my window began to shift. We left the gritty, gray concrete of Skokie far behind us. The highway gave way to wide, sweeping roads. The landscaping became manicured and deliberate. Welcome to the sterile, suffocating wealth of the Naperville suburbs. Paloma stirred next to me. She blinked at the passing subdivisions. Large brick homes sat behind perfectly trimmed hedges. Sprinklers ticked rhythmically over impossibly green lawns. She rubbed her eyes and looked at me. Where are we, Margot? I kept my eyes fixed on the road. We are following the money, Paloma. We turned onto Elmwood Drive. The trees here were old and heavy with leaves. My GPS chimed softly. You have arrived. I pulled the Lexus over to the curb. I put the car in park. 402 Elmwood Drive was stunning. It was a newly built luxury townhouse, dark gray siding, crisp white trim, a pristine 2-car garage with frosted glass windows. Paloma unbuckled her seatbelt. Her breath hitched in her throat. She leaned forward, pressing her hands flat against the cold glass. She whispered, "Do you think he bought it for us?" She looked at me with wide, desperate eyes. A push present? For the baby? My chest tightened. I looked at her sunken cheeks. I looked at the dark circles under her eyes. She wanted so badly for him to be a good man. She wanted this nightmare to have a fairy tale ending. But my auditor instincts were screaming. You don't hide a push present behind a corporate shell company. You don't let your wife face a $9,000 eviction notice to buy a surprise house. Fraud doesn't work like that. Embezzlement doesn't leave room for romantic gestures. The math was entirely wrong. I turned off the engine. The car went completely silent. Let's go find out, I said. We stepped out of the car. The morning air was crisp and cold. Our shoes crunched loudly on the pristine concrete driveway. I could see the little black lens of a doorbell camera watching us from the porch. It was exactly 10:14 a.m. Would you have walked up to that door? Be honest. Most people would turn back. Not me. I needed to see what my $60,000 actually bought. We walked up the 3 brick steps. The front door was heavy mahogany with frosted glass panels. I reached out to press the doorbell. Then I froze. My hand hovered in the empty air. My stomach dropped to my knees. I looked down at the woven welcome mat. I expected to find a secret office. I didn't expect to find a pink toddler's tricycle sitting on the pristine front porch. My hand hung in the air, an inch from the illuminated doorbell button. I stared down at that pink toddler's tricycle on the woven welcome mat. It had a little white basket on the handlebars. The plastic wheels were scuffed from heavy use. Paloma gripped the sleeve of my wool coat. Her knuckles were completely white. "Margot," she whispered. Her voice was shaking so badly I could barely hear her over the wind. "Whose bike is that?" My forensic brain had been running 1,000,000 miles an hour all morning. I was building a federal case against my own son. But looking at Paloma's pale, terrified face, something inside me broke. The morning sun was reflecting off the heavy mahogany door. I took a deep breath and forced my shoulders to drop. "It's a push present, Paloma," I said softly. "He bought you a house." I actually believed it in that exact moment. Numbers don't lie, but my blood does. I ignored the math. I told myself the missing $20,000 was a down payment. The $5,000 a month was simply the mortgage. I tapped my leather-gloved finger against my purse. It all made perfect mathematical sense. I pointed at the cheap plastic wheels of the little pink bike. The previous owners probably left it behind in the move. People leave junk on porches all the time. Langston is just terrible at communicating. My mind drifted back 25 years. We were standing in our old kitchen in Skokie. The smell of pot roast was in the oven. A 7-year-old Langston was hiding his hands behind his back. He pulled out a messy, glue-covered, painted macaroni frame. It had little gold glitter stars stuck to the corners. He had a huge gap-toothed smile on his face. He had kept it a secret for 3 agonizing weeks. He always loved grand reveals. He just never knew how to execute them properly without causing a mess. I looked at the sleek Ring doorbell camera mounted on the door trim. Of course he set up an LLC to buy the property. He was an architect. I stared at the pristine brickwork framing the entrance. He wanted to protect his assets and surprise his wife. I felt a sudden, sharp pang of maternal guilt in my chest. Istinim. My hands actually felt warm for the first time in 3 days. I had assumed the absolute worst about my only child. I had convinced myself he was a monster starving his pregnant wife. I squeezed Paloma's trembling shoulder. The fabric of her cheap jacket felt thin under my grip. He's probably got contractors in there right now painting the nursery. He wanted to move you out of that awful apartment. Let's ruin his surprise. I pushed the doorbell button firmly. A digital chime echoed loudly inside the empty foyer. The little blue light on the Ring camera instantly started spinning. It was recording us. If Langston was still awake and panicking, his phone was buzzing right now. He would look at his screen. He would see his mother and his missing wife standing on his secret porch. We stood there on the cold concrete steps. My breath plumed in the freezing morning air. I could smell fresh pine mulch in the flower beds. The Naperville street was completely dead quiet. Just manicured lawns and expensive SUVs parked in wide driveways. I checked the time on my phone. It was exactly 10:14 a.m. I could hear footsteps approaching from the other side of the mahogany door. They were heavy, deliberate steps, not the quick, busy pace of a contractor. Paloma wiped a tear from her cheek with the back of her hand. She was clutching her pregnant belly with both arms. "You really think he did this for us?" she asked. "I know he did," I replied. The guilt was washing over me in massive waves. I was already rehearsing my apology to him in my head. I shifted my weight on the concrete porch. I would tell him I was sorry for doubting him. The deadbolt clicked loudly. The heavy brass handle began to turn downward. I actually smiled, feeling like a foolish, overbearing mother until the front door opened and the woman standing there wasn't a real estate agent. The heavy mahogany door swung inward on silent hinges. A wave of warm, vanilla-scented air washed over my face. It smelled like expensive candles and fresh laundry. Standing in the foyer was a woman. She looked about 28 years old. Her blonde hair was perfectly blown out. She wore a cream-colored cashmere sweater and pristine white leggings, and she was heavily, undeniably pregnant. My lungs stopped working. The crisp Naperville air suddenly felt too thick to breathe. Beside me, Paloma let out a tiny broken gasp. It sounded like a dying bird. The Ring doorbell camera glowed a steady blue to my left. The little red recording dot was staring right at us. Langston's phone was probably vibrating in his pocket right now. If he opened the app, he would see us. He would see his two worlds colliding on a digital screen. I had to pivot. Fast. I forced a bright plastic smile onto my face. I spoke loudly toward the camera. I said, "Good morning. We're selling magazine subscriptions for the local community college." It was a pathetic, desperate lie, but numbers don't lie and neither do survival instincts. I needed an excuse for two strangers on her porch. I babbled, "We have great deals on home and garden issues." My hands were shaking so hard I had to grip my leather purse. The blonde woman blinked her pale blue eyes. Then she offered a soft, polite laugh. She smiled and said, "Oh, I'm sorry. We don't really read magazines." She rested her manicured hand on her swollen stomach. A massive, flawless diamond sparkled on her ring finger. It was a 3-carat oval cut. It caught the morning sunlight perfectly. Had you ever watched a human soul shatter in real time? I felt Paloma sway violently on her feet. I grabbed her elbow, digging my fingers into her cheap jacket. I had to keep her upright. If she collapsed on this porch, the game was over. The blonde woman looked at us with genuine Midwestern kindness. She asked, "Are you ladies thirsty? I can grab you some bottled water." She turned slightly toward her gleaming marble counter kitchen. That movement shifted her body out of the doorway. The wide hallway behind her came into full, devastating view. My eyes locked onto the wall above an oak console table. There was a massive framed portrait hanging there. It was a professional engagement photo, printed on expensive canvas. A man and a woman, laughing on a beach at sunset. The woman was the blonde standing right in front of me. The man kissing her cheek was my son, Langston. He was wearing a custom navy linen suit. I recognized it. I bought it for him 2 Christmases ago. My blood turned to ice water. The sterile coldness of an audit hit my veins. I heard Paloma choke on a wet sob. She was staring dead at the photograph. Her face was the color of dirty chalk. She looked like she was going to violently throw up all over the woven welcome mat. 2 women, both pregnant, both claimed by the same man. One was starving in a roach-infested apartment. She was wearing cheap black sneakers and a stained diner uniform. The other was glowing in a luxury townhouse. She was wrapped in imported cashmere. The blonde woman turned back around. She noticed us staring into her beautiful, pristine home. She smiled and said, "My fiancé just bought this place for us." Her voice was painfully sweet. "For our growing family," she added. My brain was doing that thing where it tries to reject reality. 3 years. My son had been building an entirely separate life. He funded it with the money meant to keep his actual wife alive. He was literally starving his unborn child to buy another one a mansion. I managed to choke out, "It's a beautiful home." I kept my grip tight on Paloma's arm. I asked her, "When is the wedding?" The blonde woman's smile faltered. The warmth vanished from her face. Her pale blue eyes filled with sudden glassy tears. She looked down at her cashmere-covered belly. She rubbed the bump with trembling fingers. She whispered, "We were supposed to get married next month." She looked back up at me. A single tear tracked down her flawless cheek. She said, "I'm Sutton. I'm Langston Vreeland's grieving fiancé." Topic Chapter 9. Grieving. The word hung in the freezing morning air between us. My hands went entirely numb. I could hear Paloma's breathing hitch beside me. She was swaying on her cheap black sneakers. I didn't hesitate. I dropped the lost grandmother act. I pushed past the pregnant woman and stepped right into the foyer. The entryway smelled like expensive vanilla candles and fresh paint. An oak console table sat against the wall. A crystal vase full of white roses rested on top. I turned back to the doorway. "I'm Margot Vreeland," I said. "Langston's mother." Sutton's hand flew to her mouth. Her 3-carat diamond caught the porch light. "Oh my God," she gasped. "Langston said you lived in Europe. He said my health was too poor to travel," I added, testing the waters. "Yes," Sutton nodded eagerly. "He said you were confined to a clinic in Switzerland. I'm so glad you're better." I grabbed Paloma by her cheap winter jacket and pulled her inside. I shoved the heavy mahogany door shut. The deadbolt clicked into place with a loud thud. We were officially off the Ring camera. But Langston had already seen us. He was probably watching his phone screen right now. "I live in Chicago," I said. My voice was pure ice. "Why did you call yourself Grieving?" Sutton touched her chest. She was wearing a pristine, cream-colored cashmere sweater. A silver pendant rested against her collarbone. "Because of the anniversary," Sutton whispered. She looked at Paloma's stained diner uniform with confused, pitying eyes. "Langston's first wife. She passed away." Paloma made a sound like a wounded animal. It was a wet, choking gasp. Her knees buckled beneath her. I caught her by the arm. She grabbed the edge of the oak console table to stay upright. Her knuckles turned stark white. Sutton pulled a rose gold iPhone from her pocket. She tapped the glass screen a few times. She held the bright display out to me. It was an Instagram post from 3 days ago. The photo showed the silver pendant up close. It was shaped like an angel wing. I read the caption out loud. "Honoring the angel looking over our new family. We miss you, Paloma." It had over 400 likes. I saw comments offering prayers and condolences. "He bought it for me to honor her memory," Sutton said. She wiped a single tear from her cheek. "She died in a car crash." My stomach violently dropped. The pristine foyer started to spin. Istonem, numbers don't lie, but my blood does. My auditor brain immediately began pulling the mental ledgers together. He didn't just cook the books, he burned the entire accounting system. I pictured that crumpled pink eviction notice from the diner. I remembered the dates. I pictured the digital bank statements. "When exactly did she die?" I asked. I stared dead into Sutton's perfectly manicured face. "Last November," Sutton replied softly. "Right before Thanksgiving." It was devastating for him. I looked at Paloma. She was staring blankly at the white marble floors. She was a ghost haunting her own life. She'd been legally and socially dead to this woman for an entire year. The sheer sociopathy of it was suffocating. Langston hadn't just created a fake life. He had murdered his real one for sympathy. I looked around the foyer. I saw a pair of men's leather boots by the door. They were Langston's boots, the exact pair I bought him for Christmas. He was playing the wealthy, grieving widower in a Naperville mansion. Meanwhile, his actual pregnant wife was scrubbing toilets in Skokie. My phone vibrated violently in my wool coat pocket. Once. Twice. 3 times. The Ring camera alerts were hitting my phone. That meant they were hitting Langston's phone too. He was watching his 2 worlds collide. I felt a wave of pure nausea wash over me. According to Sutton, Paloma had died in a tragic car accident last November, the exact same month Langston stopped paying Paloma's rent. Topic? Chapter 10. My phone was vibrating so hard it rattled against the oak console table. Langston's face flashed on the screen over and over. He was watching us through the Ring camera. Sutton just stood in the foyer, staring at Paloma. Her eyes darted from Paloma's stained Waffle House uniform to her swollen belly. I watched the exact second Sutton's brain put the pieces together. The color drained completely from her face. She whispered, "You're supposed to be dead." Paloma swayed on her feet, clutching her stomach. She looked like she was about to pass out on the hardwood floor. I grabbed Paloma by the arm and marched us both down the hallway. "Kitchen now," I said. I wasn't a mother right then. I was a forensic accountant, and an audit was officially open. We sat around the massive marble kitchen island. The overhead pendant lights reflected off the pristine stone. "Phones on the counter," I ordered. 3 cell phones slid across the cold marble. My phone was still having a seizure from Langston's calls. I flipped it face down. "Open your bank accounts," I told them. Paloma's hands shook as she unlocked her cracked iPhone. She pulled up her Chase checking app. The screen showed a balance of $14.12. Sutton picked up her rose gold phone. She hesitated for a second before sliding it across the island to me. I looked down at Sutton's Chase bank app screen. Numbers don't lie, but my blood does. The joint account balance was $84,200. Right at the top was a pending deposit, $5,000 transferred from my personal account just yesterday. Paloma let out a sound that was half so, half choke. She buried her face in her hands. "He told me we were bankrupt," Paloma whispered into her palms. Sutton stared at the $14 balance on Paloma's shattered screen. "He told me he inherited a trust from his late wife," Sutton said. Her voice was completely hollow. I pulled a notepad from my purse and clicked my pen. "Let's reconcile the calendar," I said. "Where is he during the week?" Paloma looked up, wiping her eyes with a rough paper napkin. "He works from home Monday through Wednesday," Paloma said. "He locks himself in the Skokie apartment." Sutton shook her head, her hand resting on her pregnant belly. "No," Sutton said. "He travels for architecture site visits Monday through Wednesday. He's only here in Naperville Thursday through Sunday." Eastonham. It was a perfect, seamless split. 2 women. 2 pregnancies. 2 entirely different realities. "What about the expenses?" I asked, tapping my pen on the marble. "Sutton, what is Apex Assurance?" "There's a $450 charge every month." Sutton frowned, staring at the crystal vase of white roses on the counter. "I don't know," she said. "He handles all the insurance policies." My phone buzzed against the marble again. Langston was leaving voicemails now. The sheer calculation of it all made the room spin. He didn't just stumble into an affair. This wasn't a mistake or a moment of weakness. He had engineered a financial firewall between his 2 victims. He was starving his legal wife in a dingy apartment to fund a luxury life here. And he was using my money to do it? Have you ever realized that someone you love is actually a monster? It is a physical sensation. My chest felt tight, like I was breathing in shattered glass. Paloma started cramping again, doubling over the kitchen island. Her breathing was getting shallow and fast. The stress was pushing her body to the absolute limit. I looked at the 2 pregnant women sitting in the sterile, expensive kitchen. He wasn't just cheating. He had meticulously separated them by zip codes, bank accounts, and a web of psychopathic lies. Paloma let out a choked, guttural gasp. She doubled over the massive marble kitchen island. Her hands gripped the cold stone edge. Her knuckles turned completely white. The stained yellow diner apron bunched tightly around her swollen belly. I grabbed her shoulders to steady her. Her skin was clammy and freezing cold to the touch. On the counter, Sutton's rose gold iPhone vibrated violently against the marble. The screen lit up with another incoming call. The caller ID just said Langston. He was panicking. His voicemails were stacking up, one after another. His two perfectly separated worlds were colliding in real time. I ignored the ringing phone. My brain was doing what it always does in a crisis. It was running the numbers. I pulled my silver laptop from my leather tote bag. I slammed it down right next to the crystal vase of white roses. A specific line item from the Chase bank statement was burning in my mind. $450. A recurring monthly charge on the first of every month. The merchant name was Apex Assurance. I had assumed it was a premium for his Lexus. I looked up at Sutton. She was standing by the stainless steel refrigerator. Her hands were trembling against her pregnant stomach. I asked her a very simple question. Sutton, who provides your car insurance? She blinked at me, completely confused by the pivot. Geico, she whispered. Why? My stomach dropped into my shoes. I felt the blood drain entirely from my face. Numbers don't lie, but my blood does. If Apex Assurance wasn't covering their vehicles, what were they insuring? I flipped open my laptop screen. The bright light illuminated the dark kitchen. I navigated straight to the Gmail login page. I typed in Langston's primary email address. I knew his password. It was the same one he used since his freshman year at Northwestern. Capital V, his birth year, and the word architect. The inbox loaded instantly. I typed Apex into the search bar. I hit enter. 3 emails popped up in the results. The most recent one was dated October 14th. The subject line read, Annual Policy Renewal Notice. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely use the trackpad. I double-clicked the attached digital PDF. The document filled my screen. It was an Apex Assurance policy summary. I scanned the black text on the bright white background. Istinum. The breath completely left my lungs. I had to lean my entire weight against the kitchen island. My knees literally threatened to buckle. This wasn't an auto policy. It wasn't property insurance for the Naperville townhouse either. I read the insured person field. The name printed there was Paloma F. Reeland. I scrolled down to the payout conditions. The legal jargon was incredibly dense. But I am a retired IRS auditor. I know exactly how to read the fine print. The policy covered accidental death. It also included a very specific maternal mortality rider. If Paloma died from complications during childbirth, the policy would trigger immediately. That toxic herbal tea wasn't just a sick control tactic. It was a murder weapon. He was trying to induce a fatal premature labor. Have you ever looked at a piece of paper and realized you raised a monster? I stared at the glowing screen until my eyes burned. Paloma moaned in agony beside me. She clutched her stomach. Her knees scraped against the lower marble cabinets. I looked back at the PDF document. I found the primary beneficiary line. The name was printed in bold black ink. Langston Vreeland. Everything finally made perfect, sickening sense. The fake death story he fed to Sutton. The starvation diet forcing Paloma to work at the diner. The forced herbal tea masking as holistic medicine. He wasn't just abandoning his first wife. He was liquidating her. The $450 chase charge was the final piece of the puzzle. It wasn't a car insurance premium. It was a $2 million life insurance policy, and the sole beneficiary was my son. The Naperville kitchen was completely silent. The only sound was Paloma's ragged breathing. I stared at the silver laptop screen. The Apex Assurance logo glared back at me in bold blue letters. Sutton stood frozen by the massive marble island. Her knuckles were stark white against the dark stone counter. She whispered, $2 million? Her voice was shaking so hard it cracked. Paloma let out a sharp guttural moan. She collapsed hard against the lower marble cabinets. Her hands clawed desperately at her swollen belly. The stained yellow Waffle House apron slipped off her shoulder. Her cheap black sneakers scraped against the polished hardwood floor. I grabbed my phone from the oak console table. My fingers were entirely numb. I dialed 911. The dispatcher picked up on the second ring. I gave her the Elmwood Drive address in Naperville. I have an 8-month pregnant woman, I said. She's experiencing severe abdominal cramping and contractions. The dispatcher asked if her water had broken. I looked down at the floor. No, I told the phone. The dispatcher asked if there was any active bleeding. I looked at Paloma's pale, terrified face. Not yet, I said, but you need to send an ambulance right now. I hung up and turned back to the laptop. Numbers don't lie, but my blood does. I scrolled down to page 14 of the PDF document. It was the medical underwriting appendix. The digital timestamp in the corner read November 12th. That was exactly 9 months ago. Right after Paloma first told him she was pregnant, he had initiated the policy the very next week. A memory hit me like a physical blow. 10 months ago, Langston was sitting in my Skokie apartment. We were drinking coffee out of my blue ceramic mugs. He asked me about his own birth. He wanted to know about my specific medical complications. I told him about the severe uterine bleeding. I told him how I almost died on the operating table. He just sat there on my beige sofa. He was typing notes into his phone. He asked me what the doctors called the condition. He asked how fast the blood loss actually happened. I thought he was just being a nervous future father. I thought he was trying to protect his wife. Istanem. He wasn't acting out of love. He was doing market research. My hands were trembling on the silver keyboard. I highlighted a block of text on the screen. It was Clause 4B. Maternal mortality double indemnity. Sutton walked slowly around the kitchen island. Her cream-colored cashmere sweater brushed against the counter. She looked down at Paloma writhing on the floor. Then she looked at the glowing screen. He's trying to kill her, Sutton whispered. The words hung in the sterile, expensive air. Paloma looked up from the baseboards. Her face was covered in a cold, clammy sweat. She wrapped both arms protectively around her stomach. The sheer maternal terror in her eyes broke me. She knew she finally understood what was in that thermos, the mandatory daily herbal tea, the special blend he made her swallow every single morning. He wasn't just trying to induce premature labor. He was actively poisoning her to trigger a catastrophic bleed. He needed it to look entirely natural. A tragic medical emergency at a severely underfunded hospital. Because she didn't have health insurance. Because he had drained her Chase bank accounts to nothing. He had set the stage perfectly. A destitute, overworked waitress collapsing from sheer exhaustion. No one would ask any questions. I could hear the distant wail of sirens starting up. The ambulance was coming, but Langston's plan was already in motion. I read the fine print out loud. My voice echoed off the stainless steel refrigerator. The policy had a specific rider. It doubled in payout to $4 million. It triggered if the insured died from complications during childbirth or pregnancy-related hemorrhaging. Top of Chapter 13, sirens shattered the silence of that pristine Naperville kitchen. The paramedics burst through the heavy mahogany front door. 2 medics rushed straight to Paloma. She was collapsed against the massive marble island. Her breath came in ragged, shallow gasps. Her hands clawed desperately at her swollen belly. Sutton was backed against the stainless steel refrigerator. Her hands protectively gripped her own pregnant belly. She looked from the pink toddler's tricycle in the hallway to the dying woman on her floor. Her perfect suburban lie was bleeding out on the marble. I didn't freeze. I am a retired auditor. When the building is burning, you secure the ledger. I reached across the island and grabbed Sutton's silver laptop. My fingers were stiff, but I moved fast. I saved the Apex Assurance policy as a PDF. I emailed the file directly to my secure account, then I slammed the silver lid shut. The evidence was safe. Her pressure is bottoming out, the taller medic shouted. He ripped open a plastic IV kit. The sound of tearing plastic echoed off the high ceilings. We need to transport her to Northwestern Memorial immediately. Right then, a harsh, violent buzzing rattled against the marble countertop. It was Paloma's cracked iPhone. The shattered screen lit up the dark kitchen. I picked up the phone. The glass felt jagged against my palm. I stared at the lock screen. 14 missed calls, all from Langston. The timestamp spanned from 3 p.m. to exactly 4,002 p.m. He knew she wasn't at the diner. He was actively hunting her. Before I could mute it, a new text message flashed across the cracked glass. I swiped it open. "Where the hell are you?" the message read. "You need to be in the Skokie apartment resting." Paloma let out a sudden gut-wrenching scream. Her knees buckled completely. The medic caught her, lifting her onto the yellow plastic stretcher. "The cramps," Paloma gasped, her eyes wide with terror. "They're worse than yesterday." I grabbed her cold, sweaty hand. "Paloma, look at me." She squeezed my fingers weakly. He said the tea would stop the pain. My stomach violently dropped. My mind snapped straight back to that sticky booth at the Waffle House. Just a few hours ago, I could perfectly see Paloma sitting on that red vinyl seat. I could hear her defending her husband's supposed medical care. He makes me a special herbal tea every day, she had told me. Numbers don't lie, but my blood certainly does. The entire horrific equation finally balanced in my head. Clause 4B, the Maternal Mortality Rider, the double payoff for pregnancy-related hemorrhaging, $4 million. It wasn't just a cheap holistic remedy. It was a murder weapon. Red raspberry leaf. I knew exactly what that did. In massive, concentrated doses, it forces the uterus to aggressively contract. It causes catastrophic bleeding. He wasn't just neglecting her, he was actively poisoning her. The phone buzzed again in my trembling hand. Another text from my sociopathic son. The text read, "Drink the red raspberry leaf blend I made you, babe. It'll help with the pain." My blood ran completely cold. Topic: Chapter 14. The text message glowed on the cracked screen like a death warrant. Drink the red raspberry leaf blend. I stood frozen at the massive marble kitchen island. The red and blue lights from the ambulance were flashing through the Naperville townhouse windows. I dropped Paloma's phone onto the counter. I pulled Sutton's silver laptop toward me. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely type. I opened a new Google tab. I typed 5 words into the search bar. Herbs that cause maternal hemorrhage. I hit enter. The search results populated instantly. I felt the blood drain from my face. My chest tightened like a vice. I clicked on a medical journal article. I scrolled down past the midwifery alerts. The text on the screen was absolutely damning. Concentrated doses of red raspberry leaf aggressively contract the uterus. In the 3rd trimester, massive amounts cause catastrophic, unstoppable bleeding. Istinum. My stomach violently churned. I remembered the blue ceramic mugs in their Skokie apartment. I thought about the thermos of tea Langston meticulously prepared for Paloma every morning. He told her it was for pregnancy cramps. He played the devoted, caring husband. He was actually measuring out poison. I looked out through the open mahogany front door. 2 paramedics were strapping Paloma onto a yellow plastic stretcher. Her stained yellow Waffle House apron was bunched up around her waist. Her face was gray and covered in sweat. One paramedic was tearing open a plastic IV kit. Paloma let out a guttural scream of pure agony. "What does that mean?" Sutton whispered. I turned back to the kitchen. Sutton was standing by the stainless steel refrigerator. She was clutching her cream-colored cashmere sweater. Her face was the color of wet ash. She looked like she was going to faint. I spun the silver laptop around so she could see the screen. "The tea," I said. "He's been forcing her to drink it every single day." Sutton leaned over the massive marble island. She read the medical warnings on the glowing screen. Her 3-carat diamond ring scraped against the stone counter. I watched her process the sheer horror of it. The man she loved wasn't just a liar. He was actively murdering his pregnant first wife. Sutton clapped a hand over her mouth. She spun around and sprinted down the polished hardwood hallway. The downstairs bathroom door slammed shut. A second later, I heard her violently vomiting into the porcelain bowl. She was retching so hard the walls seemed to shake. I didn't have time to comfort her. I snatched Paloma's cracked iPhone off the counter. I shoved it deep into my leather purse. This text message was documented premeditation. I was not leaving it behind. I grabbed my car keys off the oak console table. The jagged metal edges dug sharply into my palm. I had to follow that ambulance to Northwestern Memorial. If Langston showed up at the hospital, I needed to be there. I needed to protect her. My own phone violently vibrated in my wool coat pocket. Another Ring camera alert. Langston was watching us leave his secret house right now. Let him watch. In auditing, we look for manufactured losses. Fraudsters never leave their massive payouts to chance. Numbers don't lie, but my blood does. My own son was a cold-blooded monster. He had calculated the exact dosage needed to tear his wife apart from the inside. He factored her violent death into his quarterly projections. The paramedics slammed the heavy ambulance door shut. The siren suddenly ripped through the quiet suburban street. The flashing lights painted the living room walls red. I stood alone in the foyer, staring at the empty driveway. He wasn't waiting for a tragic medical complication. He was actively brewing one. The heavy ambulance doors slammed shut with a metallic thud. The flashing red lights painted the Naperville driveway in harsh strokes. I stood alone on the cold concrete. Paloma's cracked iPhone was gripped tightly in my right hand. The screen was still displaying Langston's murderous text message. Sutton was sitting on the porch steps behind me. She was hugging her knees and shaking violently. Her 3-carat diamond ring caught the ambulance lights. I walked over and handed her a piece of paper. Northwestern Memorial, I told her. Follow the ambulance and do not leave her side. Sutton just nodded. Tears were streaming down her pale face. I turned my back on the $1 million townhouse. I walked straight to my Lexus parked on the dark street. I climbed into the driver's seat and slammed the heavy door. The leather was freezing against my back. I jammed the key in the ignition. The engine roared to life. I pulled out of the quiet subdivision and hit the gas. The tires screeched against the asphalt. I connected my phone to the dashboard Bluetooth system. I dialed the number I hadn't used in 6 years. Detective Marcus Miller. Skokie Police Department. We worked a massive corporate embezzlement case together back in 2018. He answered on the second ring. Margot Vreeland? His deep voice echoed through the car speakers. To what do I owe the pleasure? I didn't exchange pleasantries. I gave him the bottom line. Marcus, I need units at my son's apartment in Skokie immediately. I heard a desk chair squeak on his end. Margot, what's going on? I merged onto Interstate 88 heading east back toward the city. The dashboard clock read 6:14 p.m. It was already pitch black outside. My son is attempting to murder his pregnant wife, I said. The line went dead silent. He took out a $2 million Apex Assurance policy. I kept my eyes locked on the red taillights ahead of me. It has a double indemnity clause for maternal mortality. I laid out the entire fraudulent ledger for him. I explained the secret Naperville townhouse and the Vreeland Holdings LLC. I told him about the pregnant fiancée left crying on the porch. Then I gave him the most critical detail. There is a silver thermos on his kitchen counter in Skokie. My voice was ice cold. It contains a lethal concentration of red raspberry leaf. I explained how the massive dose induces catastrophic uterine hemorrhaging. I heard Marcus typing frantically on his mechanical keyboard. We're dispatching units to the Skokie apartment now, he said. We will secure the thermos on the premises. Then he gave me a direct order. Margot, pull over and stay in Naperville. I looked down at my hands in the steering wheel. My knuckles were bone white. I gripped the stitched leather so hard my joints ached. 30 years ago, I held a newborn Langston in my arms. We were sitting in a rocking chair in my old apartment. I swore to protect my family at all costs. Istinum. I adjusted the rearview mirror. I never imagined the threat would be my own flesh and blood. Numbers don't lie, but my blood does. I pressed my foot down harder on the accelerator. The dashboard camera recorded my exact speed. The digital speedometer climbed to 85 miles per hour. The dark highway blurred past my side windows. Langston thought he was the smartest man in the room. He thought he could write off human lives as collateral damage. He was about to face a retired forensic auditor. I'll wait for your call, Marcus, I lied and hung up. The Skokie police told me to stay put and let them handle it. But I am a Hungarian mother, and I was going to look my son in the eye when his world ended. Topic Chapter 16. I killed the engine of my Lexus outside the Skokie apartment building. The dashboard clock read exactly 6:42 p.m. The police were already on their way. Detective Miller had promised units were en route, but I needed to be first. The night air was freezing. My hands gripped the stitched leather steering wheel. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat. I took one deep breath to steady my racing pulse. I grabbed my leather tote bag from the passenger seat. Inside was the printed 14-page Apex Assurance policy. Clause 4B was highlighted in bright neon yellow. $4 million. The exact price my son placed on my unborn grandchild. I stepped out of the car. I walked up the cracked concrete steps to his unit. The hallway smelled like cheap carpet cleaner and old cooking oil. It was a stark contrast to his luxury Naperville townhouse. I pulled out my spare brass key. I slid it into the deadbolt. It turned with a heavy metallic click. I pushed the heavy wooden door open. The apartment was completely pitch black. The blinds were drawn tight against the windows. I stepped inside and closed the door silently behind me. The air in the room felt suffocating and stale. Then I smelled it. A sharp, earthy stench drifting from the kitchen. It smelled like dried leaves and bitter iron. The red raspberry leaf, the poison he was feeding his pregnant wife. I walked over to the wingback armchair in the far corner of the living room. I sat down in the deep shadows. I didn't make a single sound. I just sat there in the darkness and waited. I could hear him moving around in the kitchen. The refrigerator door opened and closed. A metal spoon clinked against a porcelain bowl. Water was boiling. He was humming. My son was actually humming a cheerful little melody. I felt a cold knot twist in my stomach. My hands clenched into tight fists. He was preparing a murder weapon like it was just another quiet Wednesday evening. Footsteps echoed on the polished hardwood floor. He was walking toward the living room. "Paloma?" His voice called out in the darkness. "Is that you, babe? I finally made your tea." His silhouette appeared in the hallway archway. He reached out and flicked the wall switch. The brass floor lamp clicked on. It flooded the room with a sharp, sterile yellow light. He froze. His eyes locked onto me sitting in the chair. He was wearing his expensive navy cashmere sweater. In his right hand, he held a ceramic mug. Thick steam rolled off the dark red liquid inside. The smell of the concentrated herbs filled the room. For exactly 3 seconds, his brain tried to run the old software, the dutiful son routine. I watched his face shift into a mask of exaggerated relief. It was a terrifying performance. "Mom?" he said. His voice was dripping with fake concern. "What are you doing here?" He took a step forward. "Why are you sitting in the dark? Where is Paloma?" The steam from the tea curled into the air between us. He held the mug out like an offering. "I've been calling her for hours," he continued. "I'm terrified something happened to the baby. Is she with you?" Eastonham, the absolute audacity of this monster. Numbers don't lie, but my blood certainly did. I felt absolutely nothing for the man standing in front of me. I stood up from the armchair. I didn't say a single word to him. I reached into my leather tote bag. My fingers brushed against the crisp paper. I pulled out the stack of documents. It was the Apex Assurance Policy. 14 pages of documented, premeditated evil. I walked over to the glass coffee table. I slammed the documents down onto the glass with a loud, violent slap. The sound echoed in the quiet apartment. The top page was folded back intentionally. Clause 4B, Maternal Mortality Double Indemnity. The $4 million payout was glowing in yellow highlighter right under the lamp. Langston stopped talking. He looked down at the coffee table. His eyes scanned the header. He saw the highlighted text. He saw his own signature on the bottom line. I watched the exact moment his soul vacated his body. The fake concern melted off his face like hot wax. His jaw locked tight. His eyes went completely dead. It was a look of pure, sociopathic emptiness. The mask was completely gone. There was nothing left but the monster underneath. He had just poured that toxic tea into the mug to kill his wife. He turned to look at me, realizing his entire double life was over. His fingers went slack. The ceramic mug slipped from his hand. It hit the hardwood floor, shattering into 100 pieces as the dark red poison bled across the wood. Topic, Chapter 17. The dark red liquid pooled around his leather boots. The shattered ceramic mug lay in pieces on the polished hardwood floor. I waited for the monster to lunge at me. He didn't. Instead, he did what every guilty man does during an audit. He tried to cook the books. He held up his hands. He actually paused to smooth the lapels of his custom navy suit. "Mom, you're completely misunderstanding this," he said. His voice was incredibly smooth. Too smooth. "Paloma is sick. I was just making her tea." I stared at the steaming red puddle on the wood. "Eastonham, my blood ran absolutely cold. It's a special blend," he insisted. He took a slow step toward me. For her cramps, I didn't back away. I just pointed my finger at the silver thermos sitting on the kitchen counter. "I know about Apex Assurance, Langston," I said quietly. He stopped dead in his tracks. The charming architect mask completely dissolved. His jaw clenched so hard I thought his teeth would crack. I checked the glowing green digital clock on the microwave. It was exactly 6:44 p.m. "I also know about Sutton," I added, "and the 402 Elmwood Drive property." His eyes frantically darted toward the heavy wooden front door. He was calculating his physical exit. He never got the chance to run. Intense red and blue lights suddenly sliced through the living room blinds. They painted the cheap beige apartment walls in frantic flashing colors. Heavy boots pounded down the exterior hallway. "Skokie police," a deep voice roared. "Open up!" The heavy wooden door shuddered violently before swinging open. Detective Miller breached the entrance with 3 armed, uniformed officers. Their heavy tactical flashlights swept the dark room. The beams landed squarely on Langston's chest. They grabbed him by the shoulders. They slammed my son face first against the marble kitchen island. The metal handcuffs clicked shut with a sharp, final snap. An evidence technician immediately stepped into the kitchen. He pulled out a clear plastic evidence bag. He carefully sealed the silver thermos inside. Another officer used a sterile swab to collect the spilled red tea from the floorboards. I watched the entire process from the corner of the room. The fraudulent enterprise was finally being liquidated. I felt absolutely nothing for the man bleeding his Miranda rights away in front of me. By 9:42 p.m., I was standing outside on the freezing Skokie sidewalk. I watched the police cruiser's dashboard camera record the final moments of his freedom. An officer shoved Langston roughly into the hard plastic back seat of the squad car. His expensive suit was ruined. His head was forcefully bowed. I crossed my arms against the bitter wind. The ledger was finally closed. 3 days later, I was sitting at my kitchen table back in downtown Chicago. I held my silver iPad with shaking hands. I stared blankly at the glowing screen. The local news headline was plastered across the front page. It read, "Architect arrested in bizarre poisoning plot against pregnant wife." I took a slow sip of my black coffee. The bitter taste grounded my racing thoughts. Paloma was still under heavy guard at Northwestern Memorial Hospital. She and the unborn baby had barely survived the night. Sutton was currently barricaded inside that Naperville townhouse. She was entirely alone, facing the absolute ruins of her fake life. Langston had financially and emotionally bankrupted them both. Numbers don't lie, but my blood does. I had frozen his assets permanently. My cell phone buzzed on the glass table. It was Detective Miller. I pressed the phone to my ear. I could hear thick paper files shuffling on his desk. He told me they had just received the lab results from the state crime lab. The toxicology report came back 3 days later, and what they found in that thermos upgraded his charge to attempted capital murder. It has been exactly 6 months. I am sitting on the back porch of a beautiful brick home in Milwaukee. The morning air is crisp and cold. I am holding a sleeping infant against my chest. My grandson. He smells like lavender lotion and warm milk. His tiny chest rises and falls against my collarbone. I feel a fierce, overwhelming peace. The kind of peace you only earn after surviving a war. Sometimes I close my eyes and I am back in Skokie. I see that diner. I see Paloma with a dirty yellow sponge wiping down a sticky Waffle House table. I remember the smell of burnt grease and cheap syrup. I remember the dark circles under her terrified eyes. It feels like a lifetime ago. The sliding glass door opens behind me. The metal track squeaks slightly. Paloma walks out carrying 2 steaming mugs of decaf coffee. She looks beautiful. Her cheeks have color again. Her eyes are bright and clear. She smiles and says, "Sutton is bringing the baby over around noon." I nod and take the warm ceramic mug from her hand. Sutton had a healthy little girl 2 months ago. Now, the 2 mothers are practically sisters. They bonded over the shared trauma of loving a monster. They share baby clothes, recipes, and a fierce determination to thrive. Langston is sitting in a Cook County jail cell right now. The judge denied his bail at the arraignment. The attempted capital murder charge stuck tight. He is awaiting trial in a concrete box. He wears a scratchy orange jumpsuit instead of his custom navy linen suits. Numbers don't lie, but my blood does. Istanem, I raised a sociopath. I trusted him blindly for 30 years. But when the time came, I dismantled his entire existence. I liquidated that Naperville townhouse. Since my money-funded Reeland Holdings LLC, my forensic accounting team tore the corporate veil to shreds. We seized the property. Every single penny from the sale went into a new account. Yesterday morning, I sat at the kitchen island with my silver iPad. I finalized the financial paperwork. I initiated a massive wire transfer. I stared at the digital receipt on the screen. It confirmed a deposit of $500,000. The receiving account read, Paloma Vreeland Irrevocable Trust. Langston stole her security and tried to steal her life. I made sure she will never look at a pink eviction notice again. Sutton's daughter has a matching trust fund. I balanced the books. I looked down at the tiny fingers gripping my cashmere sweater. My grandson sighs in his sleep. I rest my chin gently on his soft head. I spent 35 years auditing tax evaders and corporate thieves. I thought my career was just about math. It wasn't. It was training for the ultimate audit. I audited my own son's soul, bound him entirely bankrupt, and closed his account forever. I want to know where you are watching this from right now. What time is it there? Drop a comment. I read every single one. If this story hit you, drop a like. Men who use financial abuse to control women rely on our silence. We cannot stay quiet. Hit that subscribe button if you want to hear more. Turn on notifications. Hit that bell. Langston Vreeland thought he was the smartest man in the room. He thought he could bury his wife to buy a new life. Instead, his mother bought the shovel and buried him.